Hi, everybody. I'm Jason Cusick. I'm the lead pastor of Journey of Faith, and so great that we can be together. Happy New Year. If you are new with us, thanks so much for joining us. Maybe this is your first time in church this year, maybe New Year's resolution time. We're happy to have you with us. Also, this is the point in our service where we connect with our Torrance campus. Hi to everybody at our Torrance campus. We're so excited that we're connected in this way. This was, last weekend was our highest attendance ever at our Torrance campus since our launch. So it was really exciting. And thank you so much, all of our volunteers that are serving and making that a great experience. Also, if you're watching us online, great that you can be joining with us. This is the second week in our 4-week series called Best Year Ever. We all want to have the best year ever, but we know that there's going to be some challenges. So what we're doing over these 4 weeks is we're kind of preparing for some of those challenges, inviting God to help us get ready for things that are coming. And I think 2020 is going to be a super contentious year because of the elections. I think it's already filled with just a lot of nastiness, and we're going to have debates and electioneering and politicking and kind of heated conversations and stuff like that. I was thinking about the debates that will be happening or already kind of happening right now, and I was remembering my high school experience because I was the captain of our debate team in high school. And so for 3 years, traveled around, did tournaments and competitions for speech and debate. And I was remembering my first debate class in 10th grade and my first debate that I did. And I got into this class and the debate coach said, all right, we're going to be having you debating each other in class next week. And I'm going to assign you. So Jason, your topic is going to be prayer should not be allowed in public schools. Now, I was a pretty anti-religious person at the time, so I was like, this is awesome. This is right up my alley. I can't wait to talk about this. And you're going to be debating Tamika, and Tamika was this really kind and loving Christian girl, and I thought, I'm going to mop the floor with this girl. And so the debate coach was like starting to explain a little bit more about how we're going to be debating, and my mind was just going. I was starting to formulate these anti-prayer arguments, and I was already thinking what resources I would consult, and I left, and we had a week to prepare, and I came back on debate day, and they said, okay, first debate of the day, Jason and Tamika. Jason, you'll be debating on the side in favor of prayer in schools, and Tamika, you'll be against. And she was like, okay, and I was like, wait a minute, I don't even believe that. And my debate teacher said, I don't care. She said, in order to be a good debater, you have to research and fully understand all the different sides of the arguments in a way where you could argue any side necessary as if you believed it from your heart. Because she said, if you don't do that, you don't understand the person you disagree with, and you won't respect them. And I was like, oh. And she said, do you remember me saying that last week? And I was like, no, I was too busy reinforcing my own beliefs, and like convincing myself of what I believed it to be true. Well, I got slaughtered in that debate. It was bad because I didn't know the other side. But I made a good friend. Tamika was a really good friend. And over 3 years, she was actually on our leadership team of our debate team. And I remember talking to her in our senior year, and she said, the week before we started in that debate class, the week before we debated, I started praying for you. And she said, actually, this year, my senior year, I felt like God was telling me that you were going to be a pastor someday. And I went, that is ridiculous. I disagree with you. So that's 2 debates I lost against Tamika. But I did learn some important lessons through that. I learned the importance of understanding where another person is coming from, even when they disagree with me. I learned how you can be a very good debater and also be kind and gracious. And that long-term relationship with Tamika that I had, I learned that people's souls are more important than me winning arguments. I was thinking about that as we go into this year because it's going to be a contentious year. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to imagine for a moment that this year is probably something we're all going to experience. You're at lunch, maybe you're at work or at school or you're just in your neighborhood, and the person you're sitting across from, conversation gets around to the topic of politics and the elections. And you realize that the person sitting across from you not only votes different, but their beliefs and worldview that inform their voting couldn't be more opposite from what you believe. And then it starts getting a little bit more grating because the person's getting louder, they're getting more impassioned about what they believe, and then as they're talking, you are pretty much sure that they're just regurgitating that news service or that radio program that you respect the least. And it's just going. The question is how are you going to respond to that person? What are you going to do in that relationship? Here's the main idea for the message today. We can be ready to seek unity during this contentious year. We can seek unity during this contentious year. So I want to share with you some passages from the Bible. They're quotes from Romans and 1 Corinthians and some from Jesus. These are letters written to Christians living in the first century. And Christians in the first century were trying to figure out how to take what they believe, their deep-held convictions, and how do they communicate what they believe to people that they disagree with, people who share their faith and people that don't share their faith. And you might be visiting with us for the first time. Maybe this is your first time in a church. Maybe it's your first time thinking about these kinds of things. And maybe you're not a Christian. And if you're not, we're so happy that you're here. I'm hoping that what I'm going to share for you, some principles that can help you as you go into this year, they can help us all, no matter where you're coming from in your faith and in your life. So here's 3 principles that can help us during this contentious year. Here's the first one. Be motivated by love. The foundation of all of Jesus' teachings was love. When someone asked Jesus, what are the most important commandments in the Bible? He said, love God, love other people. Jesus once said that people will know that you're connected to me, not if you know how to effectively win arguments, but if you love. Love is so important. Now, love doesn't mean there's no truth. You have no convictions. It doesn't mean you can't have strong convictions. What it means is you are strong and hard with your convictions, and you are soft and gentle with people. Here's how one Bible writer put it. Be on guard. Stand firm in the faith. Be courageous. Be strong, and do everything with love. I like the balance there. I have my convictions. I have my beliefs. But I'm very thoughtful and careful about how I interact with people. Because love is something we need to be motivated by, except sometimes love can turn into something else. Sometimes we might be loving up front, but then when the conflict hits, we go to other things. I'll give you an example just from my own life. I had a conversation recently with somebody, and this person and I disagreed on something. And this person wanted to do their best to tell me that they disagreed on this thing. And they were really passionate and really strong and got really upset. My first thought in my mind was, gosh, I need to understand this person more. I need to understand why this person is so impassioned and so upset about this thing. And that was the loving response. By the grace of God, that was the first thing that happened. But then the person said something to me that was mean. And then something switched in me. And I thought of the last time somebody was mean to me. And I suddenly remembered a nasty email I got. And then all of a sudden in my brain are all these thoughts going of all the times everybody's ever hurt me in my whole life. And it was this massive thing. And I moved from love to defensiveness and anger and self-protection. And it can happen in all of us. We might start with love, but then it's very easy for us to move to something else. We move to guilt, we move to shame, we move to anger, we move to self-protection. And we need to recognize what's going on with us. So as we go out into 2020, we're going to have relationships with people that need our love, even if it's a source of contention. So here's a question that you can ask yourself. What is one relationship in my life that needs a bigger dose of love? Let's take a moment and think about this. Would you just close your eyes for a moment and just take a moment and maybe the Spirit of God will bring a name or a face to your mind. Maybe it's a contentious relationship, somebody that needs a bigger dose of your love. Think for a moment. Just be open to that. Now, there's some of you who are responding right now with, oh God, not that person. You know, that sometimes God will bring to your mind somebody that you have a conflict with. You say, but I don't feel loving toward them. Well, here's an action step for you. Read the Bible's description of love and identify an area to work on this week. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 13. It's the chapter on love. It's how the Bible describes love. Here's the amazing thing about how the Bible describes love. It does not describe love as a feeling. Like, oh, I feel like I love this person, and now I don't feel like I love this person. Oh, I'm having this positive feeling, and now, because of something they said, now I have a negative feeling. Love in the Bible is not that. Love is not a feeling. Love is a series of behaviors in which we do good to a person. So when you read it, you'll find this. I put a little checklist here. Here's how the Bible describes love. And when you go and read this week, I want you to kind of look through this and just identify one area that you can work on for yourself. For example, maybe some of you are impatient. You cut people off. You don't even let them finish their sentences. They talk, and while they're talking, you're trying to think about what you want to say, and you're like, hurry up and finish so I can say what I believe, right? Some of you might be, you're not kind. You're kind of mean. When you find somebody that agrees or thinks differently than you have character attacks. Or you say things about them. You stereotype them. You group them in to a bigger category, and you say things about them that are mean. And you're disconnecting from the relationship. Here's one that I think all of us, I think this is the most important message of Christian love, of God's love for us and our love for other people for 2020. Love is not easily angered. We are in a culture that wants us to be very quickly responsive to stuff and angry. Here's some information. Happy face, sad face, up finger, down finger. What do you think right now? The culture says, I need your response to me. Well, I'm supposed to respond right away. Jesus was not easily angered. Didn't mean he didn't have convictions about things. But the loving thing to do is not to be easily angered or easily offended or easily triggered. How can I respond in a loving way? Here's mine up here. Keep no record of wrongs. That's me. I'm like, I need to work on this. This is like the big thing for me because I got that list. I'm on a grudge streak. You know, I've got like this huge list of things that just so easily pops in my mind. I get hurt by somebody, I think of everybody that's ever hurt me in my whole life. And then I'm no longer talking to that person. I'm talking to that family member that hurt me. I'm no longer talking to this guy who's upset. I'm talking to the bully in the 6th grade that this guy reminds me of. I'm no longer talking to this person. I'm talking to this crazy person I heard on the radio who I thought was ridiculous, rather than talking to the person in front of me and engaging in a relationship with that person. So number one principle as we're going into this contentious year is be motivated by love. Here's the second one. Care for the person separate from their beliefs. Now, in the early days of Christianity, when Jesus' teachings were kind of being taken in by his first followers and then spread out, Christianity started as a small group of Jewish men and women living in first century Palestine. As it spread out into areas of people that spoke different languages and had different customs and were different races and had different family backgrounds. And so what had to happen over time is, as Christianity grew, we needed to say, what is most important that we all have to have unity on? And then what's the stuff that we can kind of disagree on? And we're still all united together? And I think that's a big question. So in the first century, the big issues that the early Jewish Christians faced was eating kosher and worshiping on the Sabbath. So it was what you're supposed to eat and not eat, and is there a day of the week that is more important than every other day? And as Christianity spread, they were like, oh, this is from God. There's food you're supposed to eat and not eat, and one day is more important than any other day of the week. But as Christianity spread, the Christians realized, actually, that's not true. Actually, we can disagree on that. And so God led Paul, who was one of Christianity's first missionaries, to write to churches who were struggling with this. And here's what he wrote. He said, those who feel free to eat anything must not look down on those who don't. And those who don't eat certain foods must not condemn those who do, for God has accepted them. So that's about food. And then he goes into holidays and what days we should gather together to have church and worship. He says, in the same way, some think one day is more holy than another day, while others think every day is alike. You should each be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable. Those who worship the Lord on a special day do it to honor him. And then he concludes with this idea. So then, let us aim for harmony in the church and try to build each other up. So the idea is that there's some things that we're going to have convictions on that really we should all be in the same place. There's other things individually we're going to have really strong convictions on, and other people will have strong convictions the other way, and that's okay. Now, how do we know which is which? Well, actually, last year we did a series called Bullseye. Here's a picture of our app on the phone. And we did a whole series on here's the things as a church we will die for. And scripturally, where are they coming from? Here's some things we'll defend. This is what we believe, but other churches might believe other things. And then here's the things we're going to discuss. And we're going to try to discuss these without being disagreeable, but we're going to recognize, look, we have different takes on it. And it's not just different opinions. We might have some really strong convictions on stuff. And if you have a strong conviction on it, you need to have a strong conviction. But the goal is not for you to try to tell everybody else that does not have that conviction that they're out of line with God or they're spiritually lost or something. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. You know, when I was reading this passage in Romans that was talking about food and days of the week, I had an interesting experience last week. Last week I wanted to go get lunch. So I was like, man, I want to go to a Christian establishment to have lunch. So I said, I'll go to Chick-fil-A. And I pulled up and I was like, oh, wait, Chick-fil-A's closed. Chick-fil-A only serves chicken, and their religious beliefs tell them we should be closed on Sunday. So you know where I went? I went to another Christian establishment, In-N-Out Burger. And they only serve beef. And their Christian convictions lead them to be open every day of the week. So one group says one day is special. The other group says every day is special. Both Christian. We're going to have disagreements. What we have to learn to do in our relationships is focus on caring for people even when we have different beliefs. So I had this a couple of weeks ago. I have a friend named Brandon. Here's a picture of Brandon and I. Brandon is a strong animal rights activist. I think that's a right way to say it, animal rights activist. So Brandon organizes prayer vigils at slaughterhouses. He will organize protests. Brandon feels there is that it is a moral conviction of his that we need to change the food industry as we know it, and it is wrong to use animals for consumption and for byproducts. And so as he's been posting things on the internet, and as he's been talking about this, he's become very passionate and very strong. And I've had people go, man, I don't know, why is he so upset about this? And why is this such a big thing? And I was like, that's a great question. I think I'll go to lunch and ask him. So I said, Brandon, choose whatever you feel like is the best place where I can eat vegan, and then let's have a conversation. So we went to this place in Redondo, and it was great, and we sat down, and I said, tell me about what happens at slaughterhouses. Tell me about what happens when you do prayer vigils. Tell me about your beliefs about the Bible and about God and how it relates to food and eating and how it relates to someone like me. And then I worked at trying to find some common ground. I actually shared with them some early Christian quotes from the first few centuries of the church where key theological leaders were vegetarians based on their theology. And we tried to find some bridges that we could build. And then we kind of navigated through some of the areas that we disagreed on. We didn't get into everything. But the point is that Brandon and I care about each other, and we care about having a relationship enough that we're going to be kind of thoughtful about how to navigate our friendship. So, because that's the priority, even when we have different beliefs. And I'll tell you something that's really helped me is this word, curiosity. See, sometimes we're not curious about each other. I hear something you say, and I hear a word or a phrase or something you post, and then I just put you in a category. You say, oh, I know what you believe. I haven't asked you. You'll use a word or a phrase, this happens all the time in culture. We'll use a word or a phrase, and it's almost like a code word to let other people know what we believe, and then we just categorize them. In anthropology and actually in religious terms, it's called a shibboleth. Look it up. It's actually from the Bible, and it's been adopted into anthropological culture. It's usually a word cue, something that's said, a shibboleth, that if you say this word, then I know you belong to this group now. So we're so easy to drop people into groups rather than let me get to know a person. Let me hear your story rather than reacting. Here's a question I have for you. Who can you be less judgmental of and more curious about this week? Maybe it's somebody that lives in your neighborhood and they have that lawn sign that's totally different than your lawn sign. How did they get to that place? What's their story? How did they grow up? What experiences have they had? How can you care about the person and build relationships with the person? Here's an action step that you can take even this week. When interacting with someone with whom you disagree, ask them to tell you more about what they believe. When somebody goes, oh, I think this is totally wrong, and it's against what I believe, I go, tell me about that. Rather than saying, well, I think it's right. Or they say, I think this is right. Well, I think it's wrong. Tell me about what you believe. A lot of times, when they're starting to tell me about what they believe, I go, gosh, I kind of have a very similar belief. Or, boy, I agree with you on this, and yet we've come to different conclusions. Sometimes we don't want to hear what they believe. You know, this slide that we created here yesterday, it had a typo in it, and it actually said, ask them to tell you more about what you believe. I was like, that's the exact opposite of what we're saying. You know, here's what I believe, now you tell me about what I believe. You know, like that's not what we're trying to say. Find out more about the person. You're relating that Jesus was a master at this. Getting to hear people's stories. What do you want? What are you looking for? What do you believe? Draw people out. And I think that's very different than what's happening in our culture where we just want to label and categorize. We're moving so quick. We need to slow down. And we need to learn how to have civil conversation. I've been listening to this podcast lately called the Unbelievable Podcast. It's a Christian podcast, and it basically takes place in Europe, in England. And basically, the host gets together people of different views and then has a conversation, not a debate. You have like an ardent Christian and an ardent atheist. And then they go, so tell me about where you believe. What would you say to that comment that person made? Oh, what do you think about that? And they have a conversation. And it's teaching me so much about learning how to relate to people. If we're going to have a good year, if we're going to have the best year ever in 2020, we need to be motivated by love. We need to care for the person separate from the beliefs. And then here's the third thing. Let your experience in church impact your life outside church. And here's what I mean by that. Look at this quote from Jesus. He said, so if you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple, and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice there at the altar, go and be reconciled to that person, and then come and offer your sacrifice to God. Now, what Jesus is saying here, Jesus was teaching to primarily a Jewish audience. And back in the first century, if a Jewish person was going to go worship God or go to a religious gathering, they would go to the temple in Jerusalem, and they would usually come with an offering. And it was either like money or grain or an animal sacrifice. And so Jesus was saying, when you come to this religious gathering with a large group of people, if during that time of worship you remember that somebody has something against you, you should leave and go try to repair that relationship. I think it's interesting. It's not that I remember that I have something against someone. It's if I remember that somebody has something against me, then there's a moral obligation for me to go do something about that. Can you imagine if we actually did this today? Can you imagine you come into church and you're like singing a song, and the song's about how good God is and how God forgives us, and then you realize there's somebody like, oh man, that person apologized, and I never said, that person wanted to reconcile with me, and I never said I'm sorry to that person. Gosh, I need to do that. We're just one song in. Maybe I can get back in time for the rest of the service. I'll see you later. And you just leave because you're like, oh, I got to fix this relationship. What Jesus is communicating here, notice he's kind of implying that during the worship experience, God may actually be bringing people to our minds that we might have a contentious relationship, that we need to do something about it. This is another reason why the singing portion of our worship services is so important, because we actually use a different part of our brain during singing, and I believe God speaks to us differently during the singing part than during the talking parts. And some of us aren't as used to encountering God with that part of our brain. But God is wanting to do stuff throughout the service, and God wants to do stuff not just right here, but it's to fuel us to do something out with the rest of our lives. What I'm trying to say is, a church service is not a haven to insulate us from the contentious relationships that we have outside of a church experience. If you're new with us here, this might be your first time in church. Let me just explain to you a little bit about how I believe God wants Journey of Faith to operate as a church, and how it might be different than maybe what you've experienced or maybe what some of us know. Some people view church like a cruise ship. In a cruise ship, you get together with all of your friends, you all know each other, it's all your favorite food, it's all your favorite songs, and when you get in this cruise ship, you can leave the cares of the world behind. I don't believe that's what God is calling us to as a church. The other idea that people have as a church is that church is like a battleship. And what we do when we come to church is we get away from those evil people. You know, the people that are ruining the world, those people, the bad people, and all of us good people get together because we're right, and then we just start lock and load. We get together and we rouse each other up, we arm ourselves because we got to go out and we got to get those people. I don't think that's what church is about either. I believe Journey of Faith is more like what's called a mercy ship. You know what a mercy ship is? They have these ships where all these volunteers get together, they get on a ship, and then they just go park the ship in an area, and then all the hurting people, they say, come on to the ship. Then they do health care and mental health, and they do dental care, and they do counseling, and they feed them, and they take care of them, and they build bridges and restore lives and connect families. I believe that God parked this church in the South Bay in 1911 so we could be a mercy ship. This congregation, actually, this building is shaped like a lot of buildings, church buildings in the 1950s. It's an upside down ship. It's the hull of a ship turned upside down. That's how a lot of churches were built in the early 1900s. The idea is it's a ship. And it's not, we're here to come help you poor people who need something. They have something to offer us. We have something to offer them. There's no us and them. They are us. We are them. We're in this together. And together, we're trying to serve together and learn together and grow closer to Jesus. And we're all trying to figure out how we can take the teachings of Jesus and really implement it in all the areas of our lives. I believe that's what God is calling us to. Now, I want you to go back in your mind to that idea that I gave you in the beginning, that this year you're going to be sitting across from the lunch table with somebody at work or at school or out in the neighborhood, and you're going to find out that that person not only votes differently than you, but everything that leads them to vote differently than you is different than what you believe. And as they're talking, they're getting more heated, they're getting more intense, they're getting more passionate about what they believe, and you feel like they're just regurgitating the stuff they've heard on radio programs and news programs that you don't respect at all. What are you going to do? First, be motivated by love. Don't allow yourself to go to those unloving ways, those impatient, unkind, untrusting, negative lists of wrongs, being triggered, being easily angered. Be motivated by love. Jesus was always reaching out in love. Have your beliefs, have your convictions. Be hard in your convictions and soft and gentle when you interact with people. 2, care for the person separate from their beliefs. Be curious. Find out about their story. Figure out how they came to believe what they believe. What is important to them? What's valuable to them? You might find a lot more common ground than you realize. And 3, let your experience in church impact your life outside church. Allow what you're learning here when you're singing, when you're praying, when you're silent, when you're standing, to pervade your relationships with people. If you have people that are unchurched people in your life that believe differently, then invite them to church. Say, hey, come with me. Some of you are here today because somebody invited you. Hey, come with me to church, and then I'll take you out to lunch afterwards. Maybe they want to make a difference in the world. Hey, come join me in one of our outreach events. Let's go serve together. They'd be like, that's great. I'd love to do that. I love making a difference in the world. If it's somebody in church and there's a conflict that you have with them or there's tension, give them a call. Write them a note. Say, hey, I'd like this year, I'd like us to just talk. Maybe we've had some differences. I just want to kind of be a peacemaker. How could we emphasize the stuff that we have in common, and maybe we disagree on stuff, and do your best to kind of make amends. That's how we can have the best year ever. And when we do that, we're going to end up being the people of Jesus, where Jesus ends up being the priority identity in our lives. Because with all of our identity politics, there's every group that says, I want you to be in my group. I want you to be in my tribe. I want you to be in my corner. And Jesus is like, I actually want you to follow me because I got people all over. And if we can have Jesus as our primary identity, I think it's going to help us have the best year ever. That's how we're going to close the message, is how we're going to close our service today. So would you all stand with me as we're closing our service? And at Torrance, if you'd stand too. Thanks so much for coming. Again, if this is your first time with us, we're going to be speaking on kind of the best year ever over the next 2 weeks. We'd love to have you come back. Please come back and join us. If you want to know more about what we do here, we have great groups to get connected with and service opportunities. We're trying to make a difference in the community. We have a next steps area right outside that we'd love to tell you more. And if there's something going on in your life, you want somebody to talk to, maybe somebody to pray with or pray for you, we're going to have some volunteers after the service that would love to be with you and help you with that. Let me close us with a real simple word of prayer. Gracious God, thank you so much for this new year. And we thank you for the gift of Jesus, who's motivated by love, who cares for us and cares for everybody, separate from beliefs. And God, would you help us as we experience more of your presence and more of life with you? Would you help that to impact all of our lives and all of our relationships, especially in what could be a contentious year this year? Thank you for helping us be ready to seek unity in a contentious year. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you, everybody. See you next week.